Good evening and shalom to each of you, my sisters and brothers. We are grateful for your presence here today as we join our hearts in our 10th annual ecumenical and sacred studies focused on race, justice, and liberation. Our theme this year is Stop Hate, Speak Up, and Spread Love. We certainly are grateful for God who have sustained this great movement and work in the township of Montclair and beyond as we seek to build bridges and to connect one with another, to grow in our relationship and to see our community more cohesive as we listen to one another, talk about our various journeys respective to our groups. I want to come together in a time of prayer. Let us pray. Oh God, we open ourselves up to you in whatever way you desire to move. We thank you that this vision came from you of seeing how much we have in common and how we can do a great work together, even coming to dialogue about our historical experiences. Help us to have compassion and empathy one for another, and help us to be able to strengthen and deepen our bond of faith and fellowship. And so we turn our session and service over to you, guide and direct, and we shall be led. The awesome name of our God, God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, we do pray. Amen. Our vision for the 2024 series is we have asked each speaker to come and to do the same thing. We're asking each speaker to come and talk about their experience of hate. And then to help us to unpack what the impact of that hate has been, what are the resources that help the people in this particular community work through this victim, and how they have been able to thrive and flourish in the context of hate. We were privileged to have Will Ashley join us, who gave us a psychological understanding of the impact of hate. I came on February 14th and talked about the impact of hate for Black Americans. Imam Kevin Daoud Amin came last week and talked about the Muslim experience. And so tonight we are grateful to have, I call a friend of mine and certainly a friend to Union Baptist Church, Rabbi Julie Roth. Our hearts have been knit together as we have come together and joined in many activities during the MLK service last year. She came to me, and she's a person of high energy, full of joy, a big smile, and said, we need to do something beyond this event. And we did so. We explored what ways we can connect, and we formed the Interfaith MLK Book Club. And it was wonderful to gather in Shomrei Emunah Fellowship Hall. We've been there shortly after that, kept Sabbath, and through the Montclair Interfaith Clergy Association and also MACA, we have been there and sharing and fellowship with the good people of Shomrei Emunah. Let me just offer a few words of introduction, and then we're going to turn you loose. I'm excited about you coming to share with us today. When Rabbi Julie Roth became a religious study major at Brown University, she did not know that women could be rabbis. She is a daughter of a Holocaust survivor and a community organizer. She grew up in Cleveland, Ohio, in a family that sang loudly and proudly in the synagogue and always invited extra guests to Shabbat dinner. In the summer of 2005, when she was ordained as a rabbi at the Jewish Theological Seminary, which is right here down the street from me in New York City, she saw two pathways before her, one as a congregational rabbi and one as a Hillel rabbi. Formerly, she was a Jewish chaplain at Princeton University, and she had extensive experience leading high holiday services, Passover Seders, teaching classes on ethics, social justice, Israel, and theology, officiating at life cycle events, facilitating interfaith dialogue, addressing controversial topics, and counseling thousands of students and faculty. Rabbi Julie was the rabbi and co-founder of Zamru, a musically innovative, spiritually engaging, intergenerational Friday night indie minion based in Princeton that grew to a community of over 300 people. In addition, she co-founded Shabbat Katan, a creative interactive 5 and under service that revitalized young family engagement at her local synagogue. Yearning to spend more time doing what she loves most, and she does have much passions. Some of her passions are building intentional relationships, leading spiritually alive services, which we have experienced, giving inspirational sermons, officiating, and I've heard her preach, officiating at life cycle events, teaching Torah, addressing contemporary issues, and listening with compassion, which we have done recently in a fishbowl exercise. Rabbi Julie came ready to hit the ground running at Shomrei, Emunah, guided by the central teaching that each and every human being is beloved, infinitely valuable, and unique. Her calling as a rabbi is to connect each person with the peace of Torah, the Jewish experience or community that will help them live their lives as a sacred gift. She passionately believes Judaism contains the sparks not only to transform the world, but also to transform how we live our daily lives with greater meaning, joy, gratitude, and wonder. She's an avid traveler. She travels often to Israel and around the world. She's an extensive reader. And listen, she reads the same number of books each year as her age. Do not ask her how old she is. That's just information for you. Use your imagination. Rabbi Julie loves to take walks with friends, look at the ocean, and binge watch television series. I do too. She is a ballroom dancer, and she loves to eat delicious meal cooked by someone else. I do too. We have a lot in common. Rabbi Julie is grateful for the love of her family, including her husband, Rabbi Justice Bayard, and her 3 children, Ilan, Raphael, and Noah. We look forward to our family to fellowshipping with you. We're working on those dates. We are going to get it done and done soon. So, sisters and brothers, without further ado, it is my joy to bring to you our speaker of the night, Rabbi Julie Roth. Let the people of God say shalom and amen. I have made you co-host, so we are now ready for you.
Okay, wonderful. Shalom, and thank you for that introduction. I promised if you invite me to speak again, I will give you a shorter bio, so you don't have to read all of that. I am moved to be here tonight, just aware of how important it is to have an opportunity to talk about anti-Semitism, and how much I would rather do almost anything else than focus on the growing hate against Jews and against so many different groups of people in our country and around the world. Reverend Singleton, I want to thank you not only for this invitation, but for the inspiration of this series. You know, you've been a leading voice in the interfaith clergy community to say, we have to work together to fight against hate, and you always put your money where your mouth is. You know, this series is inspiring, and I think it's remarkable that members of your community are attending all of these different sessions. So I invite anyone to ask questions at any time, and I mean that. And I have a story to tell about anti-Semitism in the United States in recent years that I hope to have a chance to tell. And I just want to say from the onset before I start that this is a particularly sensitive time for the Jewish community in the United States and in Israel and around the world, because Israel is at war with Hamas. And I know that there are people on this Zoom with a lot of thoughts and feelings about the politics and the tragic losses in that war. And there is inevitably a connection between Israel at war and anti-Semitism. And so while my focus won't be on the war in detail tonight, it's something that I will touch on. And I want to say one other thing, which is just in the last 2 weeks, I've heard of 3 anti-Semitic incidents in our local community, all involving kids of different ages, 5th graders, middle schoolers, high schoolers. And there is heightened tension right now between the Jewish community and the Black community on some of these issues in our public schools and more broadly speaking. And so I think it's particularly important that we're gathered here together tonight on this Zoom call. And I just want to say, like, really, I mean it. There's nothing you can't ask me. There's nothing you can't say. I think we're all here in the spirit of friendship and fellowship and learning. And I want this to be meaningful for all of us. And I just also want to acknowledge that we have a pretty mixed group. I see a lot of Shomrei folks here on the phone, so I know there's a number of members of my local Jewish community here, and I see a lot of people who I think are from your church. And we start off with different life experiences and different knowledge levels on the subject, and I geared this more with the Union Baptist audience in mind. But I'm hoping everyone will get something out of it. Okay, so any questions already? I'm going to launch in then. I did prepare some slides. I'm going to go in and out of the slides and also try to use some of the features of Zoom to make it interactive. But if you want to speak, I can't see everyone's like faces or hands at the same time. And so really when I say you can interrupt, you can get off speaker, you could say Rabbi Julie or excuse me and ask a question. So in preparation for tonight, I read a report that was just published on the state of anti-Semitism in America in 2023, the year that just finished, put together by the American Jewish Committee. And it happened that they were conducting the research. They were going to be asking their questions just a few weeks after the October 7th attacks took place in Israel and the war started between Israel and Hamas. So they were actually able to adapt their questions to account for the war. And one of the most striking findings that I pulled from the report is that 63% of American Jews, that's really 2/3, feel less secure in the United States as Jews than they did 1 year ago. So if you would look at a pattern of anti-Semitism in the last 10 years, in the last 5 years, you would see a steady rise. But even after all that has been happening in the last 5 to 10 years, just the aftermath of anti-Semitism and very I'm trying to think of a good adjective, but very agitated, maybe agitated is a good word, agitated anti-Israel or pro-Palestinian protests around the country, and especially on college campuses, has led to a very sharp increase in terms of how people feel. And I'm hoping at some point this evening, some of the Jewish folks on the call can kind of echo some of what I want to talk about. So I just want to start with a little bit about my family. You mentioned, Reverend Singleton, that my father was a Holocaust survivor. In this picture are my grandparents. On the left-hand side, Mordechai and Golda Roth, that was their wedding picture. And both of them were killed in the Holocaust. My father, who's on the right, is pictured just after the war in Europe in 1947 with a memorial to the 6 million Jews who were killed in the Holocaust. And he and one sister survived. His mother was gassed to death in Auschwitz-Birkenau with his 6 youngest brothers and sisters, and his father died of starvation and disease in a concentration work camp before the death marches. And so I grew up from a very young age knowing that in Europe during World War II, people hated Jews so much that they killed them in mass numbers. And so anti-Semitism has always been as real to me as my family tree. But on the other hand, growing up in Cleveland, Ohio in the 1970s and 80s, I really didn't experience much anti-Semitism at all. If you look around the Zoom call, there are, I think, some Jewish members who have some years on me. And it's not uncommon for people who are a generation above me to have experienced more anti-Semitism in America growing up. You talk to people who are 80, 90 years old, they remember being beat up by other ethnic groups, like maybe the Catholic group in their neighborhood when they walked home from school, or they remember being excluded from certain professions or from country clubs. But for me, as somebody who's 50 years old, I really didn't experience anti-Semitism until the last couple of years, and that's what I want to talk about. So I'm just throwing out the definition of anti-Semitism. The word anti-Semitism was consciously created by a German who wanted to emphasize that Jews are a race and part of the Semitic race, and that's why the word anti-Semitism developed. It's a little confusing. It's less confusing than a word like Jew hatred would be, but it is the most commonly used word, and it really goes at the heart of that question: are Jews white? Are Jews a race? Like, what is the source of the oppression, the prejudice, and the description that's directed towards Jews as individuals or as a group? So I want to point to this moment in 2017 because I think this was a turning moment for Jews in America, and I would be curious to hear how the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, Virginia was experienced by the Black community, kind of relative to the arc of racism in the lives of people on this call. But this march was very brazen. And though I don't show the counter protesters here who are also out in force, the just brazen chanting of neo-Nazi rhetoric, including Jews will not replace us, which means Jews will not replace whites who are supposed to be at the top of the food chain in America, is an anti-Semitic trope that stems back to the Holocaust and even earlier. And I think one of the experiences I had when I saw the Unite the Rally was, wow, that's really frightening. And I also was like, oh, but it's happening in the South. And I live in the Northeast, and there's all those issues like left over in the South from the Civil War, and this isn't going to happen in other parts of the country. This is like an anomaly. So even though I found this to be frightening, I dismissed it. And then I think the next major event in recent years was the shooting that took place at the Pittsburgh Tree of Life Synagogue. And in 2018, just a year later, you might remember that 11 people were killed and 6 were wounded at the time. That was the deadliest attack on any Jewish community in the United States. And I remember being frightened to go to synagogue because these people were shot to death in synagogue. And I can remember, I have a daughter who's now 12. She would have been, trying to think, do the math. She was like 7 at the time. And the synagogue we belonged to in Cleveland, in Princeton, had, the sanctuary had steps. And it was possible if you would lie very flat at the bottom of a step that maybe somebody wouldn't see you from behind. And I would sit there in synagogue after this attack thinking, like, if God forbid a gunman came into the synagogue, would I tell my daughter to run or to lie down where she might be shielded by one of those steps? And would I lie down on top of her or would I lie next to her? Like these were the kinds of thoughts that would go through my head, both when I was in synagogue and when I was asleep at night. And so for me, it was this sense that it's no longer that people want to kill Jews over there in Europe back then during the Holocaust, but now also here in the United States. So this, for most American Jews, was a very critical turning point. And people started to say things like, is this Nazi, is like the United States Nazi Germany? Is it safe here? Like people would have those conversations, even if they didn't think they were rational. Remember, this is a number of years ago. Democracy seemed more rock solid in our country then than it does now. This was before, the storming of the Capitol. But I think for me, this newspaper that was printed by the Pittsburgh Gazette with the masthead of the words of the mourner's Kaddish, the prayer that Jews say when someone dies, Yitzgadal v'Yitgadash Shemei Rabbah, on the newspaper of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette was such a powerful statement of solidarity for the Jewish community, one of many. You might remember that the Pittsburgh football, there was just all over the country and all over Pittsburgh, there were signs of solidarity and support of the Jewish community. And so even though it was a terribly frightening turn of events, I also really tried to remember how much solidarity there was. And at Princeton, we had a rally, a vigil really, after this shooting. And it was not only standing room only, we had to start late because there were students and campus partners lined out the door to come to the vigil. And so I think it's important to understand that while there is a frightening turn of events in the United States for Jews, there's also an appreciation where there is allyship, and also for Jews, usually we feel that we can rely on the police for protection. And I think that's something that the Black community doesn't always feel, or maybe mostly doesn't feel in the United States. But for the Jewish community, we feel very comfortable either turning to the police to protect us or paying for armed guards to protect us and feeling like that can work for us. So I'm going to just pause for a second to see if there are any questions, or if anyone wants to say, if maybe up to 2 or 3 people want to say something about what either the Unite the Right rally felt like for them, or what the Tree of Life shooting felt for them.
Hi, everybody. David Whitworth, Union Baptist trustee. Can everybody hear me okay?
We can.
Okay, because the signal is sketchy sometimes. So very quickly, the Charlottesville rally was very disturbing because of that chant, "You will not replace us, the Jews will not replace us." And my mind said, and who are you that we would replace you, and replace you where? Since this country was inhabited before. So all of that was in my brain. I'm going, the colossal gall that you would, and if you felt, let me see, I'll use this word carefully, subconsciously inadequate, that you felt like you were being replaced and that threatened you, then that's another conversation. But we are not at fault if you feel replaceable. And then in the very end, there's a lot more I can say about that, but the very end, as the common phrases in our household is, and God ain't pleased.
And God ain't pleased?
And God ain't pleased, because man, we shouldn't think too highly of ourselves. So that you're that upset about being replaced, instead of making yourself better, like say on a sports team or at a job or something, if you felt like that your position is in peril, then you would hopefully try to, do better if you can. But you don't go take the other person out.
Thank you for sharing that perspective.
I like to use sports as an analogy, because there's a time frame and a scoreboard, and if you don't have the most points on the board, you lost, and it's okay.
Is there one more person who would like to share a reaction to either of those events, Unite the Right rally or the Pittsburgh shooting?
Yeah, so Rabbi, this is Hensley Massop from Union Baptist. I would take both of those events because they all sort of add up to the same thing for me. In the Christian Bible, Jesus talks about, as he addressed the Jewish people in Jerusalem, he said these things will happen and we should not be alarmed when it happened. He talked about that you'll be beaten and killed in the synagogue. And he said you should not be alarmed when it happens, because it tells that these are times that must take place before the second coming of the Messiah. That's from the Christian point of view. And so, you know, as I read the Bible, I understand that these things are going to happen. Now, the night when this event happened in Charlottesville, I was alarmed and I was scared, because here we are in America, which is supposed to be the bastion of democracy and freedom, and we have one group of people who's trying to kill another group of people, as David said, for what purpose? And so it was very scary. And I tell you what it left on me. My wife and I had the privilege to travel quite a bit throughout the country. And we were in Virginia, and our trip called for us to stop after so many hours of travel. And it would have landed us in Charlottesville. And I said, absolutely not. I don't want to go anywhere near that city. That's such evil from what happened. And of course, the city itself is not evil, but the event that occurred in Charlottesville left such a stain on my heart that just the name Charlottesville just ring evil to me because of what happened that night. And so, yeah, that's the effect that it's having on me.
Okay, I'm going to keep going. I know that there might have been at least one other person who raised their hand, but hopefully there'll be another moment to pause as we continue to go through the slides, which I just thought I shared, but I shared something else. So let me try again. All right, so I'm jumping ahead by several years to Montclair. I arrived here in 2022, and you might remember that there was an incident in one of our local parks where there was swastika graffiti, and this is in December of 2022, and then a month later there was a synagogue in Texas where a gunman came and held the rabbi and the congregants hostage. This is Rabbi Charlie Walker, who I happened to study with in Jerusalem this past summer. And in the end, they were able to escape because the rabbi threw a chair to distract the gunman, and everybody was able to run out of the synagogue. Another rabbi I studied with in Jerusalem this summer, Rabbi Angela Buchdahl, was the rabbi who the gunman called to make a demand that who he thought could control, like who was released from prison, would release his relative from prison. You know, again, because of the Pittsburgh shooting, this triggered this question: are we safe in synagogue? Can we go to synagogue? And for me as a rabbi, and you know, some of you have met me in person, I'm 5 feet tall. I'm not particularly good at throwing things with accuracy. I started to wonder, like, do I need to, like, what would I have done in this situation? You know, like, if I had tried to throw the chair, would it have had any impact? You know, is that now part of my job description to be able to ward off a gunman? You know, so it's, I think, like, we go in and out of fear around this, you know, when there's a threat, and there was a New Jersey-wide threat also that year. We feel a heightened sense of fear. We have a lot of security measures at our synagogue. And then other times it recedes for a little while. One of the things that struck me in the 2023 report that I mentioned that the American Jewish Committee put out was that in every month of 2023, there was a high-profile anti-Semitic incident. In May, you might remember that at Ner Tamid, the Reform Temple in Bloomfield, someone made a failed attempt to throw an explosive device at the synagogue. So we, unfortunately, you know, our local community made the top 12 list. And these are all kinds of different incidents involving a lot of neo-Nazi symbols. You know, I was particularly disturbed by this Kansas farmers market vendor who offered a Gas the Jews discount. I can't even understand that. And in October, when we hit the Jewish high holidays, which was before October 7th, there were bomb threats at dozens of synagogues across America where the synagogues had to evacuate during services. B'nai Keshet, another synagogue in our area, had to evacuate just in the last few months during someone's, I forget if it was a bar or bat mitzvah celebration. I talked to rabbis who have to make the decision: are you going to finish the bar or bat mitzvah celebration in the parking lot, or are you going to wait for the bomb threat to clear? Most of these bomb threats are not real, but nonetheless, you have to treat them as real. And it's a terrible thing. I want to move on to the next slide, which talks about the particularly difficult experience of being a college student in America after, as this war is going on after October 7th. When I was the Hillel director at Princeton, we always saw a sharp rise in anti-Semitism on campus when Israel was in active conflict or war with Hamas. And I think none of what I experienced compares to what's been going on now. So in 2023, 1 in 5 college students, Jewish college students, reported that they feel or they have been excluded from a group or event because they are Jewish. And 38% of college students feel uncomfortable or unsafe because they are Jewish, or they avoid wearing a Jewish star or other symbols like a kippah head covering, or ever talking about their views in Israel. I think one thing that maybe is helpful to understand, speaking, I always think about this when I'm speaking to a Black community, is I don't know what the statistics would be, right? If you were talking about Black students on campus. I think for a lot of Jews in America, our expectation had been that anti-Semitism doesn't exist anymore. And so we have this like baseline of 0 as an ideal that we still hang on to. And even though it may be that this moment in time is not worse than, 50 years ago or 75 years ago or 100 years ago, it's worse than 10 years ago. This image here, I don't know, I'm curious from Union Baptist if anybody can identify what this image is. And I'm wondering if I'm like actually.
Oh, that's the hearing, but the 3 college
presidents.
Harvard, I think.
Yes, Harvard in the bottom right.
Penn State,
MIT and University of Pennsylvania.
Yeah, the 3 women that were in charge of the colleges.
Yes, I think this image is like seared in the brain of most American Jews who watched that clip of testimony where these highly intelligent college presidents couldn't say that students marching on campus yelling for the genocide of Jews is anti-Semitic. And I do understand in the college environment the importance of free speech and the reluctance to stop hate speech for the sake of the greater value of free speech. On campuses, they often say, how do you respond to hate speech with more speech? But for so many American Jews, including myself, seeing this increased hostility on college campuses, and then to see these 3 university presidents unable to just show the kind of basic humanity of, even if they would say, let's put the legal definitions aside for a second and just talk about how terrible this is very disturbing. It feels like you're not, your kids are not safe on campus, or you're not safe on campus. I just saw yesterday footage from 2 days ago on the Berkeley campus. There was an Israeli speaker, and there was a pro-Palestinian or anti-Israel rally outside. And the building, I don't know if other people saw this, but the building had big glass, wall windows, and the protesters were pounding on the windows from the outside. The Jewish students were inside to go attend this program, and they actually broke the windows. They were pounding so hard. And there have been incidents on a few college campuses this year where Jewish students are literally trapped in a building with protesters, not just chanting or holding signs, but doing things that are physically threatening, or in some cases even assaulting. There was just an assault in one of our middle schools this week where a student asked another student if he was Muslim. He said, no, I'm Israeli. And they got into a heated conversation about the war, and one student punched another student to the ground. So it's very frightening and disturbing for Jewish parents in the Montclair schools to be in situations where you could have a chat group, for the grade of elementary school, and on it says things like, "I'm going to kill you." Like Israelis or Jews kill Palestinian babies, and I'm going to kill you. Like elementary school kids saying this to other elementary school kids. I mean, it's a level of rhetoric and either violent language or actual physical threat or violence. It's shocking. I don't know how else to say it's shocking. And I say that with the humility of knowing all the ways, knowing from others, not from direct experience, all the ways in which it is physically dangerous to be Black in America, knowing about all of the dangers of encountering the police. I don't want to compare. I only want to say that as a Jewish woman, as a rabbi, as a mother, I find it truly disturbing that these things are happening in our country, on the college campuses, and in our own Montclair public schools. I'm going to pause there to see if anyone has a question or wants to make a comment. So I want to say that part of my training, I guess, of being on the college campus was to really see every situation from multiple points of view. In terms of the diversity of the Jewish community, in terms of the diversity on campus. And it's painful that Harvard's first Black female president stepped down after this. These issues are complicated and painful, but it's also very difficult for me to understand why it was so hard for these presidents to say it's anti-Semitic to call for Jewish genocide. As you have probably caught on, the 2023 AJC report talks about an exponential increase in anti-Semitism since October 7th, calls for violence against Jews, destruction of property, pro-Hamas rallies at universities, which is not the same as pro-Palestinian rallies where words of praise are given for the violence committed against Israelis and other people of different religions and nationalities who are kidnapped and killed by Hamas. The desecration of Jewish symbols, attempts to stab Jewish people while yelling "Free Palestine," swastikas in school, on teachers' desks, in school bathrooms, and a surge on social media and online of conspiracy theories and anti-Jewish hatred. And as I mentioned, the heads of these universities being unable to call out anti-Semitism. I think one thing that I want to say, which I don't know if it's obvious to folks at Union Baptist, but it's definitely something that Jews talk about a lot. We feel like there's a lot of denial about anti-Semitism, a lot of either Jews say this is anti-Semitic and people say no, it's not, whereas like in other communities, if they say something is hateful against them, people don't say no, that's not racist, no, that's not homophobic. I think one of the things that strikes me is that the awareness of anti-Semitism in the United States has gone up considerably. Unfortunately, I think in large part because of the increased incidents and the visibility of those incidents, but I think also because of education and even statistics I used 3 or 4 years ago about the awareness level of anti-Semitism in the United States, let's say it was 50% of Americans don't know what the word anti-Semitism is. It's something that a much higher percentage of Americans, I forget the exact number, but let's say 3/4 are now aware. So I do think that the awareness is going in the right direction. Sorry. I wanted to say a word about social media. This is a crowd that doesn't seem to have a lot of people who are 30 and under in it. I can't see everyone's faces, but I think most people on this Zoom call are over 30. There is a big difference between the amount of anti-Semitism experienced by people who are under 30 and people who are older. You can see from the slide, 4 in 10 adults in America of all backgrounds have witnessed anti-Semitism in the last year. 68% of them saw it online or in social media. So a very high percentage of that anti-Semitism is happening online. But 83% of US adults under age 30 have seen or heard anti-Semitism online or in social media. So because younger people's lives are more tied to social media and they're online in different ways, they're more exposed to some of the anti-Semitic memes and videos and conversations that are online. So I think that's another reason why parents are very concerned about college students and elementary, middle school, less elementary maybe, but middle school and high school students, is because of their exposure to anti-Semitism online. And I'd actually be curious to know if is that also true in the Black community, that online is a major source of racism, or is the Black community more so experiencing that in day-to-day life? Does anyone have an answer for that?
I believe it happens. My name is Shamiqua Warren. I believe it happens for Black people more in everyday media that we experience racial discrimination.
And by everyday media, you mean like CNN, like the news?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. So that's an important distinction. And I'm going to make a joke. This is Jewish humor. Okay, this is a joke. That difference is probably, of course, because Jews control the media. That is called Black. Well, we would call it dark humor. I guess sometimes people call that. But in the Jewish community, one of our coping mechanisms has always been humor, and that kind of humor related to anti-Semitism has always been part of the Jewish canon. So if that rubbed you the wrong way, just consider it a cultural experience. Okay, so I wanted to spend a few minutes talking about historical anti-Semitic stereotypes. Some of these are more familiar than others. Deicide is, of course, the idea that that Jews murdered Jesus, and we should therefore hate all Jews, instead of, which I think is less prominent today than it used to be. There's more of a historical sense of Jews being executed by the Romans, or a separation between Jews who lived in that time and Jews who live today. But historically, that was a major source of anti-Semitism. The blood libel comes from the notion that Jews would kill Christians and use their blood to make Passover matzah. That particular meme can resurface in all different kinds of ways. For example, the idea that Jews caused COVID is a new form of the blood libel. Jews are disloyal, they're greedy, they're dishonest. They have a lot of power and control. They're working behind the scenes. White supremacists often believe that Jews are responsible, like they are engineering things like the civil rights movement and LGBT rights, that we have so much power and control that we're not just replacing white people, but we are the ones controlling empowerment of all the other groups that they don't want to see empowered. It's like taking Jewish conspiracy theory and weaving it into a larger white supremacist rhetoric. And another form of anti-Semitism is when you either deny the Holocaust or apply references to the Holocaust inappropriately. I think it's important to realize that Jews only make up 2% of the US population, but 60% of religious hate crimes impact Jews. And then when you look at the whole pie of hate crimes in the United States, 13% affect Jews. So it's not the majority of hate crimes in the United States, right? The majority are against other groups. But we have 13% of that pie when we're only 2% of the population. As I said, when there's a rise in anti-Israel activity, when Israel's at war, there's criticism of Israel at war. There's a rise in anti-Semitic incidents. This is from back in 2021, the last time Israel and Hamas were at war. And this was certainly my experience on campus. I wanted to say a word about the intersection of criticism of Israel, anti-Zionism, and anti-Semitism, because I think sometimes people either feel they can't criticize Israel without being attacked as being anti-Semitic, or they feel like it's hard to know where to draw the distinction. There are times when criticism of Israel, I don't like Netanyahu, I don't like this approach to the war, is just criticism of Israel. Sometimes it crosses over into anti-Zionism. This war is proof that the Jews should never have had sovereignty in the land. The state of Israel doesn't have the right to exist, would be crossing into anti-Zionism. And then if you would invoke anti-Semitic symbols to either criticize Israel or to argue that Israel doesn't have the right to exist, then you would cross into anti-Semitism. I think that unfortunately, as anti-Semitism becomes more virulent and more prominent, it's actually not that hard to distinguish between anti-Semitism and anti-Israel and criticism of Israel. But they're not one and the same. They are sometimes overlapping, but not always. And as a Hill director on campus, I felt it was very important to allow criticism for Israel and to not claim something was anti-Semitic just because I didn't agree with it or just because it was highly critical of Israel. And so just to reiterate, opposing the policies of the Israel government is not anti-Semitic. Supporting Palestinian statehood or a ceasefire in the case of this war is not anti-Semitic. Advocating for the rights of Arab Israelis and Palestinians is not anti-Semitic. But if you deny a Jewish historical connection to the land of Israel, if you hold all Jews responsible for the actions of the state of Israel, if you use Zionist as a derogatory word, if you apply traditional anti-Semitic symbols or images to Israel, or if you compare Israel or its policies to Nazis, all of those things are considered anti-Semitic. And when I say considered, what I mean is that if you look on the State Department's website of the United States at the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism, which is the operating definition in the United States, these are examples of when criticism of Israel or anti-Zionism crosses the line into anti-Semitism. So I'm going to pause and see if anyone has questions about that. And again,
Yes.
I'm open to any questions.
Rabbi Roth, this is James Harris. And again, I want to thank you very much and thank Reverend Simmel for having this conversation. As you know, I worked at Montclair State and I was very close to the Hillel on campus. And what I found in my journey from the segregated South to Newark through Montclair is that we live in one of the most segregated states in the United States of America. And so there's just not much opportunity for people to interact with people who are different from themselves. And so in order to move the needle toward understanding, you have to create safe opportunities for people to really get to know each other and to share the lived experience. Because of isolation of people by race and sometimes religion, people are subjected to the media's coverage of what the existence is. As you probably know, there's some conversation within the African American community that all Jews stick together. Well, that doesn't speak to the diversity within the Jewish community, just like there's diversity within the Christian community with all kinds of denomination. So I believe that this whole issue of intentionality of trying to get people to understand is a very, very important challenge that we all have. In the recent media coverage, is almost a suggestion that the Palestinians are all Hamas, which is absolutely not true. Hamas is a subgroup, a terrorist group that is made up of some Palestinians, but most Palestinians are not Hamas. But the media covers it as if the fight is between Hamas and Israel and Israelis, but they don't speak to the fact that Palestinians are not all Hamas. And I think that's where the horror begins to affect people when you talk about the number of people who are women and children who are being killed, who obviously are not combatants at all. And that's where the emotional thing gets really, really tight for a lot of people. It's just impossible to embrace the notion that it's right to kill women and children who are not, and to blow up hospitals and churches and museums that will probably take years if they ever get rebuilt. But I just think that we have peaceful coexistence sometimes. We occupy some same space, but we don't have any real interaction to really get to know people for their personality and as individuals.
So, first of all, thank you for those comments. I'm going to respond.
You just went on mute.
Okay, I don't know why I went on mute, but I said thank you for those comments. And I'm going to respond, even though I think it would be safer and easier not to. First of all, I didn't realize we lived in one of the most segregated states in the country. Maybe just because it happens that the two cities I've lived in have been more diverse, and something I'd like to learn more about. I 100% agree with you that you can't simply conflate Palestinians with Hamas. There are certainly Palestinians living in Gaza or from Gaza or living in the West Bank who really just want to go about their daily lives and who are in a very tight and difficult and dangerous situation because of this war. And my heart goes out to all of the families that have lost family members. And I know there's an imam in Patterson who alone has lost more than 15 members of his family. From my perspective, and I won't even say from a Jewish perspective, because it's almost funny to hear that there is this idea that all Jews stick together, because Jews say 2 Jews, 3 opinions, meaning that there's a tremendous amount of difference of opinion and sort of like argumentation in the Jewish community. So I'll just speak for myself to say that that some of the people who have been killed have been combatants. And from my perspective, the media doesn't tend to report that. It makes it seem like every Palestinian who is killed is a civilian, and I don't believe that to be the case. I think that the vast majority have been civilians, but there have been also a number of combatants who've been killed. And I think that what's so difficult about a terrorist organization like Hamas is that they do not have regard for human life, whether it's Israeli life or their Palestinian countrymen. And, for me, as someone who has family in Israel, including my niece and nephew, as well as many friends and colleagues, I understand Israel's need to defend itself after such a horrific attack, when the enemy, Hamas, says as soon as they have a chance to kill and rape, they will do it again. I am not a military strategist, so I cannot say with any authority how Israel might have been able to fight this war differently. There are certainly very right-wing people in the government there. And there are many in the Jewish community who are not in alignment with the government, or who also are deeply concerned about the number of civilian deaths. But I think Israel has both a right and a need to defend itself. And when Hamas is hiding underground, under hospitals and under schools, it makes it very difficult for Israel to eliminate this terrorist threat without harming civilians. And it's very difficult also for the Jewish community to read the news. And on this call, in the Jewish community, if this was the topic of conversation, we would have a lot of different opinions in terms of how people would talk about the war. But I just wanted to respond honestly from where I sit.
Thank you very much.
I'm going to just for a moment show a few last slides, and then see if there is further conversation. So this next slide is not the easiest one to show, but I think it's important in the context of this conversation. Right now, there are some Jewish parents of of kids in the Montclair school system that are upset by materials that have been distributed in connection to Black History Month. There's a website called blacklivesmattersatschool.com. And within it, there are resources for teaching about Palestine, including this children's coloring book. And this page is taken from that coloring book that's part of the website that has been distributed to educators in our school system, which talks about the Palestinian experience from the perspective of this one young boy. Who says, when I was only 10 years old, I had to flee my home in Palestine. A group of bullies called Zionists wanted our land, so they stole it by force and hurt many people. My mom and I cried a lot. Palestinians call this experience the Nakba. I think it's important for us to understand that a point of tension sometimes between the Jewish community and the Black community can be around solidarity with the Palestinians. And when it crosses over either into anti-Israel or anti-Semitic rhetoric. And for me, as a Zionist and as a rabbi, when you only have one narrative and not two, or when you use language like stole the land by force, which really doesn't reference the UN partition plan that divided the land, it's challenging. And it's also really important to celebrate Black History Month and to be able to rely on resources that are authored by the Black community. So I haven't had a chance to talk to Dr. Pons about this yet. There's a meeting that I'm going to be going to in about 2 weeks. But I guess I wanted to just keep the conversation real in the sense of saying it's not just a war in the Middle East. It's not just anti-Semitism in Pittsburgh or Texas. It's specific incidents in our school systems right now. And some of the tension is linked to these materials from this particular Black Lives Matters resource. It's not, this is like one resource that the school system said. I'm not saying it's every resource, but I think part of opening up conversation is also sharing these points of tension. So how am I going to end on a good note? It's like 8:29, right, Reverend Singleton? I have 1 minute.
You have as much as you need.
I don't know if we want to open it up for conversation or reactions for 10 minutes. I don't know how long people want to stay. Are there questions or comments or reactions? I have one last slide that's about, what we can do. And I definitely want to show it, but I don't want to I put a lot out there.
Yes.
And I want to just open it up, if there are, reactions or comments or questions.
Well, I just want to highlight one thing very quickly in light of what you just shown, and the reason why it's so important that we're having this kind of gathering, in which you have allowed us entrance into the Jewish community, at least an expression of it, and have been quite transparent and intimate, and allowed us to see you and feel you, as well as to know your community. And I think these kinds of conversations help dispel some of the myths. We know that there were Jewish persons prior to the war who were protesting in large amount the autocratic government in Israel, and that the government doesn't represent all Jewish persons. And we also know from conversations that you and I have had that Jewish persons all over the world are lamenting the horrific conditions and circumstances that Palestinians find themselves in, and live with a wide array of emotions, from rage to grief to guilt to pain. And so these kind of conversations help us to not other the Jewish community, but to recognize that they carry some of the same emotions and concerns, humanitarian concerns that all of us have. So it is important that we continue this dialogue. And I will say, having dialogue about contentious issues makes us stronger and builds community and helps us better to relate to one another, and helps us to overcome some of the fear and to unpack what we have taught that has divided and separated us. So I appreciate you tonight being an important bridge. So if you want to show your slide, please go ahead, and then I just want to highlight a couple more comments. Thank you.
Sure. So I think we're left with the question, what can we do? And I wanted to emphasize that just as racism doesn't just affect people of color, but it erodes all of the values that we share as Jews and Christians in our society. Anti-Semitism doesn't just impact Jews, it impacts our whole society. And we all carry responsibility for combating all forms of hate. And one way to do that is to educate ourselves and our children about the Holocaust, about contemporary anti-Semitism, and about American Jewish heritage in the public schools. And I really am grateful for everyone who took an hour out of their evening to come and learn about anti-Semitism tonight, because that is an important thing that we can do. I think another important thing we can do is foster personal connections between Jews and non-Jews. And I think I meant to say this at the beginning, but I don't think I did. I've been here in Montclair for a year and a half, and I've done a lot of stuff with the Montclair interfaith community, and now also with MACA, the Montclair African American Clergy Association. But there's no church in Montclair that I've had more interaction with than Union Baptists. From the MLK service, from the book club, from hosting some folks for Shabbat at our synagogue, from interacting with Reverend Singleton through Micah and Maca, I don't know if I can fully explain it, but you guys, your church is like so nearby to our synagogue. We both have smaller communities. It does feel like we can foster a real and personal connection with each other. I'm hoping that tonight is another piece of that, even if some of the things that we talked about are really quite sensitive and difficult. And I think, Reverend Singleton, this is what you're doing, and you're calling and inspiring all of us to do, is to work cooperatively to address hate in all forms. I want to just close by saying that one of the beautiful things that Union Baptist does is that they get together to pray before they have these sessions. You know, if you tune on a little bit early, you kind of catch the middle of the prayer session. And somebody was giving a prayer for me that God would be glorified by what I would say, and that I would never forget that I'd been placed in leadership by the Holy Blessed One. And as I was thinking about that beautiful framing and what it means to try to live up to that, I was just remembering that speaking out against hate and learning about anti-Semitism and other forms of hate and building personal connections that are real and honest is all about seeing each other as we were created, as children of God, in the image of God. All of us beloved, all of us infinitely valuable, all of us unique. And so thank you for giving me an opportunity to aspire to live up to my calling, and for having me here this evening.
Amen. Very eloquent and articulate. Thank you. I have a burning question for you. I can't let you go until I ask this burning question. And I think it's at the heart of this series. So in the Black community, we have experienced for centuries some of the most horrific expressions of cruelty and brutality and meanness. What the Jewish persons experienced on October 7th has been the American nightmare for Black Americans for centuries. Abductions, rapes, killings, parading around, and complete lawless destruction without any real accountability, and just a sense of being completely dehumanized. And so we've had to struggle with this kind of existential dilemma of how to experience hate and not hate. To not let the poison in somebody else's heart poison our wells. And just wanted to hear from you about the Torah. Certainly, we can talk about the Christian Bible, and Jesus says something that seems almost impossible, to love your enemies. But these practices of love helps us to overcome the hate and many of its forms in the Christian Bible. In 1 Corinthians chapter 13, it talks about a variety of expressions of love, including do not hold a record of wrongs, and to learn how to forgive, to be compassionate, to be empathetic, to not be retaliatory or vengeance. And so we've certainly seen that with the Israeli government. That's how they dealt with it. It's complete retaliation. So what does the Torah teach about how to overcome or work through hatred so you're not taking on what somebody else has brought into your life, especially after October 7th?
So first of all, I'll say that, and I guess I don't think we've had a chance to talk about this in depth, but I think you know that I went with a group of 33 Jewish people from our community, including myself and my husband, down to Atlanta and to Selma and Montgomery, Alabama, to do a civil rights tour and to go to the remarkable monument to lynching in Montgomery, and the Legacy Museum that Brian Stevenson created. And actually, if people haven't been there, I couldn't recommend it more. And maybe one day our synagogue and our church can make a trip there together. As much as I've studied about these issues, there was nothing like being in those places to both help me really understand the brutality of slavery viscerally, in a way that I think I probably never did before, standing before this wall of ocean, talking about the passage from Africa in chains, the slave narrative histories, seeing the hanging coffins representing those who were lynched, and sort of seeing the arc from slavery to Jim Crow to segregation to mass incarceration, the story of the Black experience in America is told so powerfully in particular in that museum and at that monument, but also at other places we went to, like at the Rosa Parks Museum and the MLK Memorial in Atlanta, you know. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is that I really feel an obligation as a human being and as a Jew and as a person with white skin privilege to better understand to the best of my ability that narrative of the Black experience in America. And that trip was a very significant learning point for me and for many people on this Zoom call and many people in our community. I think, you know, I think your question is a little bit framed with political assumptions that we may disagree about. I would not characterize the actions of the Israeli government as primarily driven by hate or retaliation. I think the Israeli government has a responsibility to protect its citizens as any country would. And I think that whether the attacks could have been more restrained or not, militarily, we can debate, but I don't believe that the primary driving force of those attacks was vengeance. I believe it was protection of Israeli citizens and really tough choices about the return of hostages. Still, we pray for those, you know, for those hostages every week in shul in our synagogue. And so I just want to say that your framing of your question about how we overcome hate when we feel hated is something I would like to you know, answer independent of your characterization of the war, because I might characterize it differently, and to say how is it, right, that a person can live a life of love after they've known hate. You know, my father literally was treated like an animal, tattooed with a number, almost starved to death, like witnessed literally like his mother and like 6 youngest brothers and sisters turned into smoke. And he had anger after the war. It took him time to heal. But I was raised by a father who was so full of love, not just for his children and for the Jewish community, but for every single human being he met. He had such a warm smile and like loved to just talk to every person. And so I have seen in my lifetime the power of a person drawing on their desire to live life and to see the goodness in the world and to raise a family that is healthy and able to love, the power of being able to do that. In my own lifetime, you know, like my father almost didn't have children. He was an older father because he wasn't sure for a while if there should be children in this world, but he decided to hope. You know, he brought me into this world. And I think that's part of the reason I feel so called to not only be a rabbi and to draw deep inspiration from the Jewish tradition, but also to be in conversation with other communities. And I want to say from my perspective, and I think from a Jewish perspective, we have 2 sources to draw from when we want to overcome degradation or hate and feel love and also a sense of holiness in our lives. One is the Torah and the teachings that we share about loving your neighbor as yourself and not oppressing the stranger because we ourselves were strangers in the land of Egypt, which are important values, but not absolute values. We also believe in Judaism in the right to self-defense, and it's important to understand that Judaism is not a pacifist religion. It's a religion that believes in bringing ethics at the highest level to war and not celebrating the death of our enemies. But it also believes in the right to defend yourself. And so that is a balance. How do you take the teachings that talk about your imperative to defend yourself, as well as your imperative to love your neighbor as yourself, and not to oppress a stranger because you yourself were, strangers in the land of Egypt. So we have those sources of inspiration in the Torah, to find a balance between these sometimes competing values, but also in our historical experience. And I think that the Jewish ability to reinvent a religion after the destruction of the temple, like the religion I practice today, is not the same religion the Jews who were killed and exiled by the Romans in the year 70 when the temple was destroyed. It's different. It's there's some things in common, but actually it's quite a different religion. The ability to reinvent, the ability to focus on all that is beautiful and wonderful about our religion and this world, and our resilience. That historical experience is also what we draw from, not only the teachings, but the example of the people who've come before us and overcome great difficulty and hatred in their lives and built families and communities of love. And so my blessing to all of us at this time of both increased hate and insecurity, insecurity in terms of human decency and democracy and so many other kinds of insecurity that we feel. My hope is that even when we disagree, we can still find our common humanity, and that we can draw from the examples of the people in our own families and in our history, as well as our teachings, to live lives of hope and love and holiness.
That was beautiful. I hope that you can end with a word of prayer, and that we can end on that note. Does that sound feasible? I see your hand, Dana, but I want to just let what Rabbi just said just resonate with us. And if you could just end with a word of prayer. You've
So
already said
I'll end with a
blessing.
word of prayer, and I'll just make this offer that Dana or others who want to say or ask questions, I'll stay on.
Okay.
For you, you can turn off the recording if you
No,
want.
no, I'll keep it open.
But I'll stay on if there are people who want to continue for another 10 or 15 minutes.
Beautiful. Thank you.
A word of prayer. Eloheinu v'Elohei Avotenu v'Imotenu, God of our ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah. Even when our hearts are heavy, may they still be open to prayer. Even when we feel saddened that our children do not feel safe, may our hearts be open to hope. And may the love that we experience as a gift from God be so great that it flows from us to each other every day of our lives. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. Well, we have come to the end of our program. If you wish to remain, you can for more dialogue with Rabbi Julie Roth. And otherwise, we will see you next Wednesday. Reverend Tom will be here, and he's going to speak representing the Asian community. Thank you. So we have Dana Love, who has a comment, and then also Deacon Hensley Master.
Go ahead.
Good evening. This is Dana Love from Union Baptist Church. First of all, I'd like to thank you for having this discussion and dialogue this evening. It's very important. I just wanted to briefly state that I personally had an experience of communities coming together for the dedication of my daughter, Corinne Mullings, when she was a year old in 2008. At that time, our former pastor, Reverend Walter L. Parrish III, and then Rabbi Elliot Tepperman from B'nai Peshet dedicated my daughter at Union Baptist Church. And it was a unifying experience. And overall, I would just like to say that when we have events and initiatives like this lets us see where we can unify and come together. And what unifies us more is what is important than what divides us. And if we come to some common ground, we can improve our understanding of each other more. And I just wanted to say that that was a significant event, not only for me and my family, but our respective churches. So thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to state that.
Thank you for sharing that story. When we were at Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta, when we took this trip back in November, there was a young child, you know, I like some, you know, like less than the baby really, being dedicated, you know, to the Lord, being dedicated to the community. And I hadn't seen that done in this way. I don't know if this is what was done for your daughter, but they lifted her up, like the pastor lifted her up and you know, just elevated her, you know, that the whole community would, in a sense, throughout her lifetime, hold her up. And you do it in that way, and was such a beautiful thing. It was actually something I hadn't seen before, and so I can picture that special moment in your family's life, and I do hope that we can lift each other up, you know, and lift our children up.
Yes, it was. Thank you so much, and God bless you.
God bless you.
Rabbi Roth, first of all, I just want to say thank you for your presentation tonight. You know, and I thank my pastor for his continuing, you know, doing these sessions. But you enlightened me in many ways tonight. You know, the Jewish people's journey and the journey of the Black people are in many ways very similar. You know, I think back to the story of the Hebrew people being held captivity for 400 years in Egypt. We've been held captivity here in America for 400 years, and our captivity continues. And so tonight you mentioned that you have some interest in speaking with the school superintendent about some issues that have gone on in the school system here. And I wonder if at some point you may want to incorporate work along with our pastor in addressing not only the anti-Semitic things, which obviously we must address, but to work in concert in addressing some of the issues concerning African Americans as well. I don't know how familiar you are with the 1619 Project, but it speaks about, right. And so these are things that have been denied in our school system, that young people who are being educated are not aware of the Holocaust. They're not aware of the journey of the Black people in this country. They're familiar with what they see on the news or what the media present to them, but the real history of your people, the real history of our people is not being told. And so, you know, it begins at this level. And so I wonder if that's something that you would consider.
You know, on Sunday, there was a meeting of the NAACP. I guess they're trying not to say NAACP anymore. I'm not sure why. And the Montclair Interfaith Clergy Association and the Montclair African American Clergy Association. Sarita, who's on the Zoom, was there with me. And there were representatives of a lot of different houses of worship. And one of the presentations that was made was about an NAACP initiative in Montclair to make sure that the state-required Amistad curriculum, which is a Black history curriculum, is actually being taught in the schools. And I happened to be seated for the breakout discussion with a person who presented about that, and we were talking about how rabbis have been meeting with the school to say we don't feel that Holocaust state requirements around Holocaust curriculum are being actually taught as they should. And we exchanged emails, and we said just exactly what you're saying, that maybe there would be a power to going to the school system together and trying to understand, because I actually think there are probably some similar challenges. I think often these requirements aren't translated into easy enough to use materials that the teachers can just, easily incorporate it. I think not all the curricular work has been done to translate the requirements into something that's more usable. So I agree with you. And actually, I found, I didn't know this. I feel a little, I don't know, sheepish to admit this because probably other people on the call already know this, but I always thought NAACP was an organization only for people who are African American. And one of the things that they said is that NAACP is an organization that's fighting against racism or fighting for the advancement of African Americans, but it's an organization for everyone. And they really encouraged all of us who were there who weren't already members to join. So you're kind of reminding me, like, that was on Sunday, and Monday's my day off, and I haven't, it's been like 4 or 5 days since the meeting, but the 2 commitments I made were to join, to pay dues and join NAACP, and using my rabbi's discretionary fund. I feel like that's a beautiful thing. And also to follow up with the people who are trying to work on the Amistad curriculum. So, I think we have more in common on these issues than points of difference. Though sometimes like ethnic studies curriculums don't include Jews, or get into Israeli-Palestinian politics in a way that seems inappropriate to Jews in the school system. And so it's not 100% always aligned, but there is so much alignment. I agree with you. It's a good reminder to follow up on this beautiful meeting, and hopefully this group will meet regularly. I think they're talking about meeting again in 2 months.
Yeah, Rabbi Ralph, I was at that meeting on Sunday.
Oh, yeah.
And one of I wanted to, we were talking about moving forward. The truth of the matter is that the state of New Jersey has a law that requires the teaching of Holocaust in the public schools. The Amistad law was tailored after the Holocaust legislation. So in the state of New Jersey, there are laws that requires the teaching of the Holocaust, African American history infused. And 2 years ago, the Asian Pacific Islander community got legislation passed. So I think one of the things that would be really helpful is for all of us to sit down with the Board of Education and say, if you're not infusing the information about these different cultures as required in the law, then we are in violation of the law. So it's not just a good thing to do.
Right.
But I was on the Amistad Commission, and I worked with the gentleman who was the executive director of the Holocaust curriculum. So we were very close, and we worked in that. But I think that's one thing that we could do in concert that would be consistent with the law, is to work with the Board of Education and say, there's a legal responsibility for you to provide a curriculum for the teachers so that they can do what the law requires, which is to infuse the history of the Holocaust, and Amistad, as well as the Asian Pacific Islander Caucus.
I put my email in the chat. I would love for you to copy it down and send me an email. And I'll just add that based on meetings I had with other rabbis, with some people from from the Board of Education, not the Board of Education, but from the school system last year, after all these anti-Semitic incidents that happened in Montclair, I kind of left not only with the sense that this is the law and that they should be doing it, but also that maybe we have to help bring some resources to the table in order to help them do it. I think that, it shouldn't, I think ideally it's not only a demand, but a desire to kind of solve the obstacles together. And I think that would be even more powerful if it was a broader partnership. So I don't want to keep people up all night, but I don't know if anyone else had their hands up before we say Laila Tov, or actually, in Hebrew, you can say Laila Tov, which means good night, or you can say Lehitraot, which means until we see each other again, which I hope won't be too long from now. Is there anyone else? All right, so Reverend Singleton, you've
Yes.
been invited for Shabbat dinner. We got to find a date that works.
Okay, well, now I got a visual. I see where we're gonna be.
And
And my wife was on, and she said, "You're so beautiful." She loved the way that you talk. So it was the first time seeing you up close. And I told my son, I said, "Come, look, this is the person whose house we're going to." So everybody's now seen you and heard you, so we're ready.
okay, good, good. I'll send you some dates, and I know Sarita and others are eager to try to find other opportunities for our communities to connect. So thank you for inviting me tonight, and I look forward to connecting again soon. Take care, everyone.
Good night. Good night. Take care and be safe.
Good night. I'll see you next Wednesday, if not before.
Okay, sounds good. Bye.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night. Thank you.